All right, welcome to this lesson. And in this lesson, we will actually be demonstrating our API. So we are done with all the coding for the basic API, and now we can actually run it and test some of the features of it. So when you're ready, go ahead and open up Postman. Once you get Postman opened up, you will see this is the interface for it. So I'll point you around, let you see what everything we're going to be using is. So here, this is where you determine the HTTP method that you want to use. So for our first one, we will use this post. Here's where you enter your request URL. So this bar here is where we will be putting in our URL. Down here, we have this body. This is where we will be typing in our request body. We will be using JSON format. So I have selected raw here because I just going to type in the JSON in here myself. Also in the headers, we will need to add this content type application / JSON. This will pass the header back, letting Spring know that we are using JSON format. So this is really all we need. We have our method selector here. We will enter our request URL here. We will add the request body here. And we need to add this content type application / JSON into our headers. And that is all. So now let's go ahead and begin to write our request URL. So the first thing we're going to start off with is creating a customer. So when we're doing this, we need to make sure we are hitting our customer controller, which is here. So we need to make sure that we use this /customer resource when we're writing our URL. All right, before we can make a request to our API, we have to actually run our application in the back end. So in order to run this application, there are multiple ways you can actually run it. You can use this check mark up here and run this airlines application if you've run it before. You can go here and actually click on this ATW Airlines application, right click, and do run as Spring Boot app. Or you can do it the way I'm going to do it. Now, let me get rid of this so I can actually show you how to get it. All right, so I like to use the boot dashboard because it has all of your Spring Boot projects that are in your workspace on it, and you can just easily find it and run it. So what I do is you need to go to Window, then go to Show View, go down to Other. And then when you get here, all you have to do is type in boot. So when you type in boot, it'll come up and it will say boot dashboard. So you click that and you hit open. It's going to open up in one of these places, either down here or mine opens up over here. So just look around for it. It's going to be somewhere in one of these areas. So once you do that, you look at you open this local tab, and then there's airlines. So once you have this boot dashboard open, your application will always be right here. So you can right click and hit start. Alternatively, there is a play button down here you can hit and it will start your application. So as you can see, my application is starting and it's wiring those beans and instantiating them. So it's doing all of that. Spring is doing all this in the background, setting up our application. So as it's going, you can see that it's initializing the JPA entity manager. So everything's here. So now it says started airlines application. All right. So now that we have this running, we know it's running on port 80 because it's letting you know here which port it's running on. So it's on port 8080. So now we know can determine our URL from this. So when we want to make a request to our customer controller, we need to use the /customer. So now that we know, we just need to write it in. So we have HTTP, which is the protocol, / localhost, which is our computer. Localhost means it's our computer because we're running this application on our computer. So localhost, and then we know the port is 8080, so we put the port in here. It's :port. So it's going to be HTTP : / localhost : 8080 because 8080 is our port. And then we'll do / and then customer. Now the reason we do /customer is because that's what we defined here in our customer controller. So when we want to use methods from this customer class, this customer controller class, we need to do /customer in our request URL. And now we're going to be doing this create method. So we need to call a post mapping, which we have set already here. By using this drop down, you can just click post. And now our URL is completely done. So now we have our URL. This is our URL. This is our method. So the only thing we have to do now is put in our request body. So the request body will be in JSON format. If you're not familiar with JSON format, I will have a resource for you to look at that has exactly what I'm typing in now. So you can just copy and paste that resource, or you can follow along and do it as I'm doing it. So you need opening and closing curly braces, and then we need the quotation marks here. And then ID. The reason we are putting ID is because in the customer class, the customer model, we have a field called ID. So we're going to put the ID, the username, the first name, the last name, and the date of birth all in that JSON. So when Spring gets that object, that JSON object, it can map those fields to these fields. All right, so let's go back to our Postman. Now we have ID. I'm just going to put ID 1. So our customer ID is going to be 1 for this customer. Then we put the username. I will use username John Doe. Then we need the first name, which is John. Then we need the last name, which is Doe. Then we need the date of birth, which when you're putting dates into Spring, you need to make sure that you have it in the specific format of year with the 4-digit year, the 2-digit month, and the 2-digit day. And you would separate those by a dash. So I will put, so let's see, when John Doe was born in 1975, in March on the 20th. So this is how you would put it. So you put the 4-digit year, a 2-digit month, and a 2-digit day. So 0, 3, and then 20. So you would have to prefix this with a 0 if you're in the single digits. So with that being said, we are ready to create our customer. One other thing, just to make sure you don't forget to put this content type application JSON in your headers before you run this. So now that that is complete, we do send, and it's sending the request to our API. And as you can see, it returned. There's one thing that is probably confusing you guys, and that I put this here specifically for this demonstration. So as you can see here, I have an ID of 1 when I was creating John Doe. So why, when it returned an ID of 3? This is because of how we set up our service class. You remember when we created our service class, we use customer set ID to null. So when we're creating, it will always create a new entry into our database table. So when you're using update, it will use the ID that you set in that customer. But when you're using create, it's going to always set this ID to null. So whatever ID you put in there, it doesn't matter. That way we know we're creating a new entry into the database and not updating an old entry. So that was the whole purpose of putting that null there in the creation. So as you can see, it created. Also, let me show you one other thing. Here is where our SQL gets printed out. Remember when we were setting up the configurations for the database, we added that SQL, show SQL to true. This is where it's happening. So when we know that we inserted a customer into the database. So it's using these question marks because these are dynamic values. So it's not going to print out the dynamic values. But we know that we inserted our customer into this database because it printed out using the show SQL configuration that we set. So that's that. And now we know we've created. So now let's move on to this read method. So in Postman, to read, we need to use the get method. And if we look at our implementation of our customer controller, we still need /customer. But when we're doing the get mapping, we need to put /ID. And this is a variable. This is not you don't put / curly brace ID in closing curly brace. You would actually put / and then a number of the ID that you're looking for. So for us, we created a customer, and this customer ID is 3. So we need to do get from this resource /3. Also in the body, you can turn this to none because in a get in a get method, you cannot pass a request body. So now when we have this all set, you hit send, and we should see the same thing return here. And we do. So now we've retrieved this third person, the customer with ID 3 from the database. So now let's do our update command. Let's take a look at our update. So update takes in a request body of a customer. So we need to pass in details for the customer that we want to update. So in our implementation in the service, our update, we just need to pass in that customer. So let's go back to our Postman, and we can change this now to put because our update command uses the put method, HTTP method. So now let's just copy this because these are the details of the customer we want to use. So we go here, let's replace that with this. And now let's change the username to Jane Doe. First name to Jane. Leave last name. And we can put March 1st. All right, so when we send this, this should come back as Jane Doe. The first name should be Jane, and the date of birth should be March 1st. So let's go ahead. Also, do not forget to remove that 3 because in our controller, where are we at? In the controller, we don't have any extra. So when you're doing your /customer and you're doing the put mapping, we don't have anything defined here after that. So you just do /customer with a put mapping. So it's the same as create, but instead of doing post mapping, we're doing put mapping. The URL will look the same except the method is changing. So See here, we have put mapping instead of post. So that's how that works. Now, when we hit send, it should update our database entry. See, there we go. Now we have Jane Doe, Jane, and the date is a little weird. Not actually sure why that happened, but that's outside of the scope of the course. We don't need to worry about that at the moment. So at the moment, don't worry about this. We do see that there were changes made to the 3 fields that we changed. So that is the goal of what we were trying to do. And lastly, let's go ahead and do our delete. The delete also takes a ID parameter in the URL. So we can go back to none here and then delete. So now when we hit delete, this user will be deleted from the database. So boom. All right. Remember, we don't return anything, so this is correct. Now let's go do a get to see if we can retrieve Jane Doe from the database. We should not be able to. And we return an error. See, no value present. So this comes from our optional. Remember earlier when I said we have the optionals in our service? So when we do this optional.get and it does not return and the value is null, we get that error saying that, hey, yeah, the value is not present. So as we can see, it's right, return C from the optional class. And that's happening right here, see? So yeah, that is that, and that is correct. We are supposed to get that error there, so don't think something's wrong. We have not put any error handling in our application, so this is what is returned. So that is correct. All right, and for the other controllers is the same thing. Just change the fields that you're using. If you put these fields in the JSON, I will add a resource with JSON objects defined for these classes, so you can just copy and paste. But I will not show them in the video because it's literally the same thing. Everything is the same except for the fact that you will be using different resources on the URL path. So I will show you that really quickly so you can see what I mean. So you will still be using http://localhost:8080, but instead of /customer, if you wanted to do a trip, you would do /trip. And then also it's the same here. So if you want to create a new trip, you use the post, and then in the body you would change these fields to be whatever are the fields that are in the trip class. So you would still have ID. Then you would have, let's see what else is in the trip class. Right, so you have ID, then you have customer ID and create date. So instead of having all of these, you would just have 3 fields, and it would be ID, customer ID, and this one would be create date. And then, so something like this. It would look like this, and then you would hit post. All right, so it threw this error because we don't have a customer ID of 3 anymore. Remember, we deleted it, so it will throw this error because this customer ID is based off of who is in the customer table. So if you don't have a customer that is created with this ID, then it will error out because that customer doesn't exist and it needs a valid customer ID before it can store it. We will be going over that later on when we actually get our security up and running with this. So don't worry about this at the moment. Just know that this is how we use our URLs to call our API. So that is all for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one.